Dzień dobry, Ewa Zajączkowska-Hernik. Witam w Europejskich Rozmowach, a dziś moim Państwa gościem jest dr Grégor Puppinck. Pan doktor jest doktorem prawa, dyrektorem Europejskiego Centrum Prawa i Sprawiedliwości organu konsultacyjnego ONZ. Good morning. In today's European Talks, my guest is you, Mr. Grégor Puppinck. You are Doctor of Law, Director of the European Centre of Law and Justice, which is a consultative body of the United Nations. And first of all, in our interview, let's talk about the report that was prepared by the European Law and Justice Centre under your supervision. In this report, you show connections between the judges of the European Court of Human Rights and non-governmental organization of public benefits, which is NGOs. And please tell me how it is and what does it mean that third sector organizations have such an impact on public administration, in this case judges, who should be independent and impartial.
Yes, thank you very much, Dzień dobry. Thank you for your question. It's very pleased to be with you today. Yes, so the European Centre for Law and Justice published a report this week, in fact, and we published another one 3 years ago on the same matter. Mm-hmm. The European Court of Human Rights is a court in Strasbourg, France, in charge of monitoring respect by the states of human rights. So the Court of Strasbourg, European Court of Human Rights, has a tremendous influence. It is the highest court of Europe. Mm-hmm. In fact, it decides many issues, including regarding Poland decisions. And so we have observed that a large proportion of the judges of the European Court of Human Rights are not professional magistrates. In fact, the majority of the judges of the European Court of Human Rights are not professional magistrates. Mm-hmm. They are law professors and lawyers working for NGOs. We have seen that among those judges, 22 out of 100 in the past 10 years were former employees or collaborators of NGOs. Mm-hmm. Not any NGO, NGOs that are active as the European Court of Human Rights. So we have seen that more than a fifth of the judges of Strasbourg come from NGOs that do introduce cases at the Court of Strasbourg, and this is an issue. It's not only an issue that we have judges coming from NGOs, mm-hmm. but they come from NGOs which bring cases to the Court of Strasbourg. And the majority of those judges come from one single network of NGO, which is the Open Society Foundation network of, yes.
So you answers on my last question, but we will be back to it. But what have you said? It turns out that the judges judge in their own case.
We have
somehow,
yes.
Because they were somehow connected with the organizations that stands before or in front of the European Court of Human Rights as a part of dispute, which generates pathologies. They also are influenced, those judges, by this organization. And can you tell me how big is the phenomenon at the European Court of Human Rights, and what do such rulings mean for organizations like NGOs?
Okay, first, the rulings taken by the Court of Strasbourg are highly important because it is the Supreme Court of Europe. Therefore, if you manage to get a good ruling from the Court of Strasbourg, you will impose the solution not only, I would say, to your country, mm-hmm. but you will already impose it to your country of origin, for example, Poland, but also to the other 46 member states of the Council of Europe. So having an influence on the Court of Strasbourg is a way to have an influence on the law of 46 member states of the mm-hmm. Council of Europe. And the Court of Strasbourg is composed only of 46 judges. And among those 46 judges, a proportion are former staff employed of the Open Society Foundation and other NGOs. So if you manage to get some of your staff as a judge, it makes the work much more easy. I am in charge of an NGO in Strasbourg, which mm-hmm. works on many cases as the European Court of Human Rights. we have been involved in more than 60 cases as European Court of Human Rights within the past 20 years. So we have been advocating cases, supporting cases, introducing cases. And this is absolutely proper and correct. But the problem would be if myself, tomorrow I would become a judge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would then
You wouldn't
receive
be
cases,
independent.
I would then receive applications introduced by my own NGO.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened? What we have seen that in more than 100 times cases occurrence, we have seen those persons adjudicating cases introduced or supported by their own former NGO, their own former employer. Even, for example, the judge of Bulgaria, Mr. Grozev, he founded an NGO in Bulgaria. This NGO is financed by the Open Society, and this judge, Mr. Grozev, then became one of the members of the board of the Open Society Foundation in charge of litigation, strategic litigation. So this lawyer, this activist lawyer, then he became a judge in Strasbourg.
Mm-hmm.
And then he received cases introduced by the organization he has been the founder and one of the directors.
In that context you've said, I should ask you, what for do we have an European Court of Human Rights right now?
What?
What for do we have European Court?
What
of
for?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why is it for?
Yes, exactly.
So, okay, the purpose of the European Court of Human Rights, I mean, you can find several.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a usual court. It is not a usual court. The origin idea is to make sure that the governments don't do mistakes. So the goal of the European Court of Human Rights, yes, the goal of the European Court of Human Rights is to make sure that governments respect individual rights. And therefore, Western countries, France, Germany, Italy, established a system of control, supervision, and this system can rule on national decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Europe has been extended to the east, after the fall of the Soviet camp, then the Court of Strasbourg and the Council of Europe has become more and more an instrument of education for Central and Eastern European countries. So the purpose of the European Court of Human Rights and the Council of Europe is mainly to educate Poland, Turkey, Slovakia, Hungary, and other countries how to be a good democracy. So this is the purpose of the system, is to educate the East so that the East can look like and be at the level of the West.
Mm-hmm.
It is the only purpose of the mechanism.
In European, do we have any problems with democracy here in Poland?
Do Europeans have problems? You mean, sorry?
Do we have any problems with democracy here in Poland?
They
think
yes, in fact,
that we have.
Yeah, but
in
fact, from the point of view of Strasbourg, of the Council of Europe, and even of the European Union, democracy is not the last thing. There is something above democracy, and the system established by the Council of Europe and the EU is not democratic. It is based on values, some ideas of society that wants to be imposed. So a liberal and individualistic system. And your political system in Poland is perfectly democratic, of course, but it is considered as at odds with the new Western postmodern values system. And today in Western Europe, we identify democracy to liberal Western values, ideas, or counter-values. So today in Europe, in Western Europe, we will say a democracy is not a country where the people can vote. It is a country where you do have immigration, abortion, woke agenda, and so forth.
Yes.
For them, this is a democracy. So, a democracy for them is an individualistic system of individual rights and claims of minorities and so forth. It is not a country based on one people with one history and one will of living together in the next generations, a will to continue as a country. It's not a nation. The problem of Poland is that you are a nation. And
Exactly.
this is the true problem.
In one of your interviews, you said, and I quote, I hesitated in publishing this report for fear of the consequences for the court and for me. But it became clear that this publication can clean up the system and be beneficial to the tribunal. The ideological collusion that dominates human rights, discourse, and institution must end. What ideological collusion were you talking about then?
I speak about the fact that the radical left or the liberal left took over the system, at least at the ideological point of view. So human rights in the past were more decent. In the past, human rights were not promoting abortion or euthanasia as a human right.
Exactly.
And today they do so. So there has been a fundamental change in the understanding of human rights. And this change is ideological. And it has not been done only because it will be the sense of history. It has been done because some people got to work and to take the decision within the court. Mm-hmm. And this is why I exposed the relationship between those judges coming from the Open Society Foundations, which has a purely American ultra-liberal leftist approach of human rights, and they import it into the Court of Strasbourg. Mm-hmm. And this is a problem because first, it is not just to impose abortion or euthanasia as a human right. It goes against justice and human rights. And it destroys our system. So at the end, it weakens the system of human rights protection because many people will refuse the system, will object to the court because the court promotes such fake rights. Mm-hmm. And so it needs, if we want the system to continue in some extent, of course we need to purify, sanitize the system from this influence, which is not legitimate, especially when they act in violence.
Do you think it is available to do so?
I don't know if it is possible. What I can see is that it is necessary to try. It is necessary to try.
And someone has to try.
Yes, we have to try. Some countries support it. And in fact, now we are already seeing a start of process of clarification of some of the shortcomings of the court. But there are many aspects to be clarified, to be corrected within the system of the Court of Strasbourg. The Court of Strasbourg is very opaque, for example. So there are no right to recusal, for example, as well. So there are a number of issues. But moreover, the main problem of the Court of Strasbourg is the fact that there is a large proportion of persons who are not judges, professional judges. As I told you, they were lawyers, activists. And I think this is one of the main problems. It is the ideologization of human rights, using human rights as a tool to impose cultural changes on countries.
Mm-hmm. And what is the role of NGOs in all of this? Could you explain the mechanical things how do they work?
So, NGOs can perfectly work within the system. I mean, it's legal, it is correct that NGOs intervene into cases, bring applications, provide elements of information to the judges, to the court. So the role of NGOs, I mean, normally is very clear. But there is a problem starting when the NGOs invest the system. So when the NGOs don't only act, as providing information to the system, but gets into the system. And then we see a collusion when you have a fifth of the judges that are coming from those NGOs, activist NGOs. When you have large foundations like the Open Society Foundation or the Ford Foundation, financing, for example, the United Nations experts on human rights. So this is a collusion. Another report we have published on the financing of the UN experts. We demonstrated that the Open Society gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to some independent and pro bono experts, so that they may work on some issues. And so yes, this collusion is something that we can observe because at the international level, those foundations are more influential than many states. The Open Society Foundation or the Ford Foundation has much more influence than many states because they are directly present within the system. They understand the system. They are not submitted to any democracy, to the vote and so forth. They can decide. They can decide by themselves how they invest. So they are much more effective than governments. Sometimes they are richer than governments, and so they have more influence in Strasbourg and in Geneva at the United Nations.
You've already answered for one of my questions. Where in all of this is George Soros? He's a leader of the Open Society Foundation, but do we have any other organizations who impacts on European Court of Human Rights, except
yes,
Open
of
Society?
course. So you have one of the main one, I would say, is the Helsinki Foundations network. So the Helsinki Foundations was in the past a very good, I guess, from my point of view, organization. It was an organization that tried to promote freedom from, the Soviet heritage and so forth. But after the fall of the communist regime, they have, in some extent, lost their raison d'être, and they've been taken over a large extent by the Open Society Foundation, which finance this network. What we have seen among the 7 NGOs that we have mentioned that sent judges to Strasbourg and are active in Strasbourg. So one is the Open Society with 12 judges, and among the 6 other...
It's a big impact.
Yes, it's a huge impact. And among the 6 other NGOs, all other NGOs are as well financed by the Open Society. So you have 7 NGOs sending 22 judges. Out of the 22 judges, 12 come directly from the Open Society, and the 10 other judges come from 6 NGOs financed as well by the Open Society. And among those 6 NGOs, the main one then is the network of the Helsinki committees. You have a Helsinki committee in Warsaw, there is a Helsinki committee in Bulgaria, in Greece, and so forth. And then there is Human Rights Watch, for example, which is another organization. But once again, it's financed 50% by Open Society. What you have to understand is that those big foundations, US foundations, Gates Foundation, Soros Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, they share the influence.
With the great names.
So yes, the great names. So the Gates Foundation has a monopoly over health. So Soros will not spend on health issues. It is let to Mr. Gates foundations. So Gates finance the World Health Organization and all the issues of vaccination and population control and so forth. Gates Foundation is the biggest one. Then Soros Foundations is specialized on human rights issues. And Gates will not pay too much on human rights. It will let Soros do so. This is why Soros is so influential in this field. And then the Ford Foundation will go on other issues. And the Ford Foundation used to go as well on the issues of population control in the past. And then it moved simultaneously to the building of the international institutions.
I will ask you maybe some kind of philosophical question, but can you try to take into the George Soros head and try to explain why he's so interested to have such an impact on that kind of organization like European Human Rights Court?
So I think there are various levels. One aspect I think is Mr. Soros is quite megalomaniac. So he wants to have a lot of influence. He wants to have to be recognized as a great philosopher, which he's not. But he pretends to be a great philosopher. He organizes his own lectures, to give lectures on philosophy, legal philosophy, and so forth. So he has this kind of megalomania. And so he wants to have influence, and he wants to create changes in societies. He has been very visionary in the way he invested in Central and Eastern European countries after the fall of communism. I was recently in Albania. I discussed with some persons, and they told me, at this time, there were only the Open Foundation, the Open Society Foundations coming. They came in some countries even before the fall of communism, according to what I've been told, to try to settle the foundations. It was maybe even the case in Poland, to liberalize the country. So the goal is to liberalize the country, to have a country more liberal, more Western, more individualistic, less holistic country. So this is the political goal. Then you may as well always consider that those foundations, not only the Open Society, but those foundations also have a lot of wealth and a lot of financial interest because they invest in many countries. And if you manage, in one hand, to change a government, if you manage to support an opponent who will become president, because you will invest in the media, you will organize, protests in the street, you will get someone famous, you will invite him in New York and so forth, so that one person will become a big figure, and you will get this person elected as president. Then, of course, you are a friend, and you may more easily, do some contracts for your financial interest as a return. And this is something you can obviously observe. On one hand, you give. On the other hand, you can maybe sometimes receive or find some good agreements with the public authorities that you have helped to get in power. And so it's the way I think it functions. Regarding the European Court of Human Rights, it is also interesting. One of my colleagues, Mr. Gaëtan Cliquenois, a French researcher, have as well looked to the financial interest into some cases brought and supported by those foundations before the European Court of Human Rights. And some of those cases are not truly on human rights. They are more on liberalization of the countries. For example, some of those foundations supported applications that was asking a deeper privatization of the lands. So you can say, yes, it is a liberal approach and so forth, but at the end, it is also a possibility for those foundations and private interest behind the foundations to invest at the end into the land of the country. So you have always a mix. Another example I like, it's quite clear. The Ford Foundation has the patent for many contraceptives that are worldwide used. And in the meantime, the Ford Foundation, or even as well as the IPPF, Planned Parenthood, but in the meantime, they do advocacy in support of contraception. So you have the patent, you get the money from the sale, but in the meantime, you finance promotion of contraception through your advocacy. Or Bill Gates, in one hand, he gives money to the World Health Organization. On the other hand, he has invested into vaccine. So what you give on one hand, through the advocacy or through the NGOs, you don't pay tax on it. It's part of your wealth that becomes tax-free, and you use this money to do your own advocacy in support of your industrial interest. So imagine I own, an industry of cars, and I will use 10% of my wealth, of my industry, to create an NGO in support of cars. and I would say, yeah, I'm a real beneficiary.
It's kind of it's one of the kind of lobby.
Yes.
Summing up all of what you said today, does the European Court of Human Rights have the mandate to pass judgments on matters falling within its competence in European? Do the European Court of Human Rights have right to give judgments in many things, many cases, when they are connected?
Yes, normally the judges should not adjudicate cases in situation of conflict of interest. So clearly, normally the court shall make sure that there is no such situation where a judge rule on a case introduced by an NGO, which has been working in the past. So this is a clear rule that shall applies in any court. But we have observed that the Court of Strasbourg do not respect it all the time. Many times it does not respect it, and this is problematic. One of the reasons, there are several reasons for that. One of the reasons is that the cases sometimes are proceeded in a quite automatic way. So sometimes the judge just signs. They don't really look to the case because the case was prepared by the registry. This is one aspect. And some other reasons are that more technical reasons, the fact that the result of opacity, the applicants cannot know in advance who will be the judge in charge of the case, so they cannot ask for a recusal, and there is no recusation procedure within the Court of Strasbourg. In any court, normally, an applicant can ask for the recusal of a judge. In Strasbourg, there is not such formal procedure. And so applicants, first, they don't know who will be the judge, their judge. Secondly, they don't know how and if they can ask for the recusation.
Is it legal?
It's a breach of the basic practice of courts. So it's a real shortcoming of the Court of Strasbourg, a real problem of the Court of Strasbourg. But there are other problems. I will tell you another one. We discussed the one of the judges, but there is the same issue with what is called the registry. What is a registry? The registry is the staff level of the court. So the not the judges, but the lawyers. There are 46 judges, but there are some hundreds lawyers. And we have the same problem with those lawyers, because some of them are coming as well from those NGOs which bring cases, and so they know very well each other. They may receive cases prepared by their colleagues. They may use the phone. And for example, in Poland, it is very clear that the staff of the Polish staff of the European Court of Human Rights is highly interconnected with one of your Polish NGO, which is the Helsinki Committee of Warsaw, because you have some staff going back and forth. So this Helsinki Committee of Warsaw sends many applications to Strasbourg, but it does also send colleagues.
Pure lobbying.
And so this makes some difficulties, I would say, for the responding states, because in terms of neutrality, impartiality, transparency, and so forth, and even confidentiality, it creates some difficulties. And another aspect, some members of the registry may also take some public positions. For example, today there are cases against Poland on abortion, because the Polish Supreme Court banned eugenic abortion.
Yes.
And some members of the registry, some Polish lawyers of the Court of Strasbourg, publicly expressed their opposition to the ruling of the Polish Supreme Court. So publicly, they express their support to the cause of the cases introduced before their own court. So we have another problem of impartiality of members of the registry of the European Court of Human Rights who express their opinions in social media and so forth on cases that they have to deal on. And so it's another dimension of issues within the Court of Strasbourg.
In the end of our conversation in this interview, I would like to ask you about one of your books, Human Rights Degeneration, Degeneracja praw człowieka po polsku. Why did you focus on that topic, and why did you focus on Poland?
So I like Poland very much. First, this is true. It's not only a compliment, but in the book, I don't focus on Poland. I try to explain I try to analyze and to explain the process of transformation of human rights since 1948, when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, and today. How can, for example, euthanasia or abortion became human rights, whereas that were clear violation of human rights? So how some practices that were against human rights in 1948 can today be presented as human rights? So I explain, I analyze all the process of transformation. It helps to understand that there is a logic into this evolution. And this logic is mainly an issue of culture. It's an issue of anthropology, but it has also deep consequences. I would say that it goes from a vision of natural law in 1948 to a vision of anti-natural law with the right to abortion or the right to euthanasia, which goes against human nature. And now today we are moving to trans-natural law or right, which are new human rights supporting a vision of transhumanism. When we speak about a right to having a child in good health, or some rights in connection to change of sex, or some rights in connection to eugenicism, it is already transhumanism, transhuman rights. So the book shows this evolution from natural human rights to anti-natural human rights and transhuman rights.
Many interesting and shocking facts you have said today in our conversation, which for I would like to thank you.
Thank you.
Our guest in this interview was Mr. Grégor Puppinck, Doctor of Law, Director of the European Center of Law and Justice, a consultative body of the United Nations. Moim Państwa gościem w cyklu europejskich rozmów był dr Grégor Puppinck. Bardzo Panu dziękuję. Thank you very much.
Thank you.